Episode 3, The Collision That Didn't Happen. Welcome to Wonders and Miracles podcast, where we celebrate miraculous moments in everyday lives. I'm your host, Liza Lawrence, a wife, mother, teacher, and miracle lover. If you're new to this podcast, which I know you are because I just launched, here's what we do here. Each week on Miracle Monday, we celebrate awe-inspiring true stories from regular people like you and me. People who have experienced something surprising and wonderful that is not explainable by the natural laws of science. My desire is to help us recognize God's hand and His love in our lives, because the more miracles we notice, the more miracles happen. Thanks for listening to the show. Now let's celebrate wonders and miracles together. Wes Stafford said, "I'm convinced that one of the most powerful forces on earth is the prayer of a child." In this episode, you're going to hear a couple of stories where the prayer of a child calls upon the powers of heaven on their father's behalf. Two different prayers, two different fathers far away, but both feeling God's comfort. I think it's fascinating and beautiful how often those needed prayers for parents come through the child. They seem to be more receptive, more open to the promptings of that spirit whispering when someone needs help. We're also going to hear another story of God's love and His awareness of us in our intimate lives. All beautiful stories. I'm super excited to be with you today, but first I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Meditations on the Mount. Meditations on the Mount are Bible-based meditations that my family's been using for years. Yes, my husband and I have created them, but seriously, they are wonderful. If you've ever longed for ways to feel God's love, peace, and stillness in your life, Meditations on the Mount can help. Here's what some of our listeners have said. Poetry of Birds said, "Finally, someone is making Christian meditations. Thank you so much. These are wonderful." Monique said, "These are the best and only Christian meditations that I've found that are this good." Jamila said, "This is by far my favorite meditation. Thank you." It's been fun to hear the response. We've had hundreds of responses with this meditation album. And because our response with our first album was so great, we just created Meditations on the Mount for children. It's a perfect way to help your children calm down, feel safe, feel God's love, and teach them to come unto Him. You can find these meditations on Amazon, on iTunes, or at meditationsonthemount.com. I also have a link on my website at wondersandmiracles.com. All right, so let's get started with this episode. I'm excited to share these stories with you. The first one, I'm interviewing my father outside. We were camping. It was kind of a fun, beautiful setting in Idaho. So if you hear birds in the background, that's where we are. Hope you enjoy.
When Liza was a little girl, we had 6 children in our family, and I was working out of town on weekends, a second job to try and augment our regular income. And it was actually up here in Idaho. We lived in Utah, and I would travel up here to Idaho to do work. And then on my way home one evening, I was expected to be home at about 6 o'clock. And Mom was waiting, and all the kids, and I didn't show up at 6 o'clock. Your mother began to be worried about that and thought, well, he usually would be pulling in by now. But all the you kids were out in the front yard waiting for Dad to pull in from this road trip. And when I didn't show up on time, Mom pulled all of you into the car and said, "Let's go down to 7-Eleven and we'll all get an icy," waiting for Dad to show up. So everybody got in the car, and little Melissa, your little sister Melissa, and she was 4 years old at the time. And she said, "I think we should say a prayer for Daddy."
And I remember this. I remember her saying
Remember
this.
this? And so your mother said, "Melissa, that's sweet of you. Why don't you go ahead and ask a prayer for Daddy?" And Melissa asked a typical little 4-year-old prayer, but in that prayer, she made the comment, please bless us to be calm. She used that word.
Interesting. I don't remember that. So I would have been 6 or 7 at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to place me in this time.
Yep. So I'm traveling down, and to get into, we lived in what's called Cache Valley, and to come home from Idaho, I came down what is called the Valley View Highway. And it's a rather narrow 2-lane highway. And it's got a lot of blind curves and blind hills. And I'm staying in my lane, but there was a whole string of cars coming the opposite direction. And I thought, that is a little unusual. There's so many cars leaving the valley, and I'm coming into the valley. Suddenly, there was a car who tried to pass on a double yellow line, shouldn't have been there, and was right in my lane. And there was nothing I could do to prevent a collision, just head on. He was in my lane over a blind hill, and I grabbed the steering wheel and just white-knuckled and didn't even have time to hit the brakes. And that car literally passed through me, and we didn't collide. I was so frightened and began to shake, and then suddenly this unexplainable calm just enveloped me. And I proceeded to drive home and thought, wow, that was a miracle. Pulled in the driveway, and there's all the kids in the front yard with their little ices and having fun. And I pulled in and I said, wow, this looks fun. And your mother said, well, we waited for you. And then when you didn't show up, I thought, well, let's put all the kids in the car and we'll go down and get an icy. So that's what we did. And I said, oh, I'm so glad you did that. She said, I have to tell you of a most unique experience. When we all got in the car, little Melissa said, let's say a prayer for Daddy. And in that prayer, she said, bless us all to be calm. And I just, chills went through me, and I said, when did she offer that prayer? And your mom said, oh, it was probably about 20 minutes ago. And I said, wow, let me tell you what happened 20 minutes ago. And that was the collision that didn't happen.
That's beautiful.
And so we count that as one of the great blessings and miracles, that this sweet little family was not, the daddy wasn't taken prematurely and came home without harm to a beautiful, loving family. It was a miracle.
That is a miracle. And often I find that it's through the children who are more receptive to offering those blessings and prayers that it came through Melissa to be aware that you needed that at that time. Thank you for sharing. I appreciate that. So our next guest on the show is Jenny from Arizona, who has a miracle story about the power of prayer. So Jenny, thanks for being on the show, and tell us about your story.
Thanks, Liza. Happy to be here. So we had a fun family wonder miracle when our daddy was hiking across the Grand Canyon from rim to rim to rim in under 24 hours.
Now, is this something that's been like a lifetime goal of his, or?
Yes, he tried once, and someone in the party was injured and they had to stop the challenge. So he was anxious to be able to complete the trip this time.
And how many people was he hiking with?
It was all of his brothers, so 4 brothers, and then all of their oldest sons. Okay. So I think there were about 12 in that party because some other friends went with the sons. And
okay.
So it was a big group, and a few of their number actually stopped at rim to rim and decided not to try going back to the other rim. They had it. So so he was anxious about it. He'd done some training, but he's a busy man, like most men, working every day, and weekends are full of family activities. So he hadn't trained like he wanted to, but he was set on it and had done his best. So I knew how important this was to him, and our family did. So he started the hike at about 4 a.m. on a Saturday morning. And around, I want to say 7 p.m. that Saturday night, I just had the feeling that we needed to pray for Dad right then. So we all came together and we knelt down and had a prayer for Dad, that he would feel well and excited and be able to accomplish his goal. And then we went on with our nightly routine. And the next day he came home around 1 o'clock in the afternoon and was telling us his story, and we were so excited. Oh, and I told the children the night before when we prayed, I said, just watch, you guys. I know that Dad is going to feel the power of this prayer. I just knew that, but I also had that little bit of hesitancy, and I hoped that it would turn out well so that they would gain their own belief in prayer. And
so a mother lesson going on.
Right.
Nice.
I was hopeful.
Perfect.
I was hopeful. So then he came home and he was telling us his story, and some of the kids had kind of forgotten about the prayer the night before, but then he started telling about his climb out of the Grand Canyon. And that he was weary, you know, it'd been a hot day, and you look up and the wall is so high, and you just think, how can I do this? So he said he was getting to that point where he was kind of dehydrated, kind of pushed it a lot that day. They'd really been going fast to try to make it within their 24-hour goal. And anyway, he was hitting a wall. And then he said, but then you guys, I suddenly felt, and then he stopped and he turned to us, he said, wait a minute, did you guys pray for me? And we all started smiling, and we said, well, what time about was that, Daddy? And he said, oh, let's see, I'd already passed this point and we'd been here. And he said, I think it was around 7 or 8 o'clock. And then the kids' eyes got big.
Cute.
And wide grins on their faces, and they looked at me like, Mom, it happened. You were right. And so then he said, you did pray for me? And they told him about our prayer. And he said, well, you guys, thank you so much. That helped so much, because right when I felt like I was hitting that wall, I just felt a renewed source of strength. And I was able, I don't know how, but I just turned into a robot and just chuck up the hill. And not a hill,
the cliff,
up and out of the Grand Canyon. And he made it out about 2 a.m. So they did it. They made their goal under 24 hours.
That is amazing. I just love how the power of prayer can reach across spanses of space and time.
Yes.
And really, it's a testament of that power that he did feel that renewal.
He felt the renewal, and I told the kids, as we pray for Dad, picture him in the Grand Canyon. Think of how he's feeling right now and what you want him to feel like. And yeah, we were in southern Arizona, almost to the border, and he was at the top of Arizona, and he still felt it right away. You're right. There's no expanse too far, too wide.
That's cool. And what do you feel like gave you the feeling to pray for him? And why would you have thought that at that time, do you suppose?
Well, I think we're all connected. When you really love someone, you stay connected, just like when you have a friend that you haven't talked to for a long time and suddenly you think of them. And so you send them a quick text or call them and they say, I was just thinking of you too. I think when you have a loved one, you are connected. And so he probably wasn't necessarily thinking, I need a prayer right now for my children, but he needed some help, and my soul could feel that because it's connected with his soul. So, yeah.
I love that. That is truly a miracle, that miracle of connection, and
Absolutely.
That the Spirit can reach you to reach him, and the power of prayer. So thank you for sharing that story. I love it.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being on the show.
So Jenny and I were having so much fun chatting after her first story that it sparked a memory of another experience that she had with God's love, and realizing how God speaks to us in his own way that we will understand that love. And so this is Jenny from Arizona with another story. So Jenny, thank you for sharing this next story with us.
Thanks for letting me share. So I especially am happy to share this because it was a good reminder to me that God knows each one of us, and sometimes we need that reminder. So I was having a really low morning. It was a Sunday, and I don't know, I just was feeling low about myself and discouraged in my parenting and in my marriage relationship, and just discouraged about myself, right? Just low. And after I wallowed in it for a few hours, I was, you still have to go through your routine. So I was standing at the sink, washing dishes and preparing a dinner for later in the day. And then I just thought, I haven't even reached out to God to help me, right? So I started just opening my heart to him and saying, Heavenly Father, what can I do to feel better? I'm sorry, I'm really wallowing in this. And a name popped into my head. And it was a girl's name that I had a friendship with and had a stewardship over to watch over her. And the month before, when I had been given her name and I knew about her birth date, and it was going to be a month later, and I told myself, okay, next month on her birthday, I want to make sure to visit her for my first time. I hadn't talked to her for about a year, but, I'd been given a stewardship over her. So
as a church group.
In a church group to watch over her and make sure she felt loved. Anyway, so things had gotten really busy and I had just, forgotten. But her name suddenly popped in my head and I thought, oh, her birthday is this month. Oh no, I probably already missed it, right? I'm in a negative energy,
right?
A negative mode. I'm like, oh great, one more thing that I've done wrong, right? So I go to where the paper is that has her birth date on it, go to try to find it, and I can't find that paper anywhere. So I call another friend in the church that also was supposed to go with me to visit her. And I said, okay, have I missed her birthday? Have we missed her birthday? And she said, just a minute, found her paper. And she says, no, it's today. And I thought, oh, that is so interesting that on the time I'm wallowing in poor me, things are hard. And then finally I reach out to God and say, okay, what am I doing wrong? What can I do better? Help me feel better. He sends me her name and reminds me it's her birthday. And I wanted to serve her, but mostly he wanted her to know she was loved.
Yes.
But in that very act, he was telling me I was loved.
Yes.
And he could use me to help someone else feel remembered by God on their birthday. And this had been a gal that really hadn't been talking to God, going to church. She was
struggling herself.
Wasn't in her life. And so that was my message. I went over to visit her within the next, 3 hours. I called and said, I'm coming over. It's your birthday. And that was my message to her is God loves you and wanted you to be visited on your birthday. And I didn't tell her my side, that I also needed to know that God loved me and knew me. So,
and knew that that's how you would feel.
I would
loved
feel better.
And feel better
loved
about yourself.
Yeah, because if God can use you, that to me, that says a lot about me. It makes me feel good about myself. If God can speak to me and use me.
Yes, to show love for someone else.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that story. That's beautiful.
Thank you.
All right, well, that's our show for today. Isn't it fun to hear such inspiring stories of the power of prayer and how God knows exactly how we need to feel His love in our lives? Thanks for sharing this time with me. Next week on Miracle Monday, we have some more amazing stories that involve childbirth, which is always a miracle, and premonitions of death. So make sure you subscribe to this podcast so you won't miss out. I would also love your support in spreading the word about wonders and miracles. The best way to do that is give this podcast a 5-star rating, write a review, and share it with your family and friends on your social media or their email. I'd love to inspire and uplift millions, but I can't do that without your help and support. It's like that quote from John Greenleaf Whittier that says, "I'll lift you and you lift me and we'll all ascend together." I want to give one more quick shout out to our sponsor, Meditations on the Mount. I hope you can find peace in abiding in the presence of God through these beautiful meditations. I know that I've benefited from them in my life. Wes Stanford said, "I'm convinced that one of the most powerful forces on earth is the prayer of a child." I hope you consider sharing your miracle stories. I can't wait to hear how God has shown up in your life. If you'd like to be on the show, please submit your story on wondersandmiracles.com. I hope you can all think of a time when you felt God's love in your life. And as always, remember to notice and celebrate the miracles everywhere. because the more miracles we notice, the more miracles happen.